Cornish Mutual, farming insurance experts.
Hello and welcome to this bonus episode of Farming Focus, the podcast for Southwest farmers brought to you by Cornish Mutual. I am your host, Peter Green. Today, I'm joined once again by Chris Walkland, Christopher Courtier and George Courtier to talk about volatility and both short and long-term actions that can be taken to deal with it. So, gentlemen, last week we spoke about the current trend in milk prices. Is that volatility becoming a normal part of dairy farming? Is it just a cycle that's always been there? Chris Walkland, I'll come to you first on that.
No, I would say that volatility is getting a lot worse. And if you take the milk price at the start of the year and compare it to the milk price at the end, then the gap between the two is getting wider. So volatility is getting a lot worse. It used to be the case that milk prices would change by 0.5p, 1p. If you were really unlucky or lucky, depending on the direction of travel, 1.5 to 2p changes in milk price.
Over a course of a year, that is?
No, that would be a monthly change.
Sorry, okay.
That would be a monthly change in price. Now we're getting price changes of 8p in a month. I think that's the record reduction in milk prices in a month. And conversely, we're getting some increases of 5p in a single month. Whereas farmers used to be able to manage with 1 to 2p price changes on a monthly basis. You know, the swings that we're getting now are insane. And what basically happens is that dairy farmers are juggling more money faster than they've ever juggled before, whether that's coming in or going out, and hopefully the same amount sticks to the sides.
Yeah, it's a huge challenge. But what's driving that volatility? Is that other commodity markets which are particularly volatile? I mean, we're recording this with the war in Iran in its first couple of weeks. You know, is it just worldwide events which
Well, I would say that worldwide events have a factor. Sentiment has a factor. Fear and panic has a factor in the market. But whereas a few years ago, well before the Courtiers were born, we used to use things like fax machines, and before that, stamps. Now communication is instant, and we can look at something online and it'll make us alarmed or relaxed. So I think that is driving behavior, and we've got a lot more of a sentiment-driven environment around us now, which is fueling volatility. We've also got IT-based trading platforms and futures markets, and you can see instantly prices for Q4 this year, Q1 2027, Q2 2027. And there are people who don't so much trade on those markets, they gamble on them. They gamble with cereals, they gamble with dairy and other commodities. And these trading platforms, these futures markets, I think probably help to fuel the volatility that we're seeing.
Okay, so we've unpacked a little bit about why we see such volatility in the markets. George and Christopher, I'm really interested in your point of view as working dairy farmers, the extent to which this volatility, these world factors, the macro things which are going on, and the way the culture surrounding these markets, to what extent does that impact the way you're thinking about your operations, you know, your input costs, how much milk you want to be producing, or is it not having any effect at all? And do you think it should?
I guess an effect like here and now, as in today, for us then going forward, it would be the diesel prices, the red diesel prices, to fair, because we obviously, like Brother said, we do a lot of our own, planting of the maize and everything. So obviously, realistically, you're going to be double the diesel cost already from what it would have been, budgeting at the start of the year to where we are now. Already that's just double. And, looking at planting of everything with the maize and harvesting first cut silage, we're looking at probably about 20,000 litres of diesel. And if you're thinking that at 69p to 70p, that's £14,000. Well, now that could be £28,000. And just a very little thing like that is a massive difference. And that's just one little aspect of what we're seeing.
Yeah. So day to day, Christopher, what is it that you actually think about in terms of what's affecting you? How can you respond to these huge factors like wars and conflicts and things like that?
The honest answer is I don't know, because obviously you don't know what's coming around the corner, but it's what you can do and what you're in control of. For us, we're a grazing based system. So if we can get those cows out grazing grass, that is minimizing our cost as much as we can. Still trying to maintain the high production without shooting ourselves in the foot, like we said earlier. But yeah, it's just controlling what you can control. And like George said, diesel, can we walk there? Can we run there? We'll take it.
and actually, following on from that, in the main episode last week, you did briefly mention the fact that you'd got an ice bank, and I think that you'd started with some renewables. What long-term changes or investments are you making on the farm to make sure that you're more resilient to swings in prices?
It's not actually happened yet. But like we said, the big focus for us then is we've invested heavily in the business. We're not in an MBZ, but everyone's going to be legally in the next 18 months. So we're putting in this slurry store that will hold 6 months worth of storage with a separator, separating the bedding for green bedding for the wintering for the cows. And at the moment, we're spending about £45,000 a year on sand. And that's for just about 5.5 months of wintering. We're looking, obviously, like you said, separating for green bedding, but future-proofing yourself, like I was saying, looking 5-10 years down the line, is you could harvest the methane off the slurry, potentially running a generator to run your dairy, say, through the winter, and your PV could be nigh on running it through the summertime. These are the things that we're heavily looking at. This is maybe more long-term, not here and now, but this is a 5-year down the line. Maybe slightly less, but
we're putting in a slurry store that will do this. We're not just putting in a clay line tank or lagoon. We are putting in a tin tower
with a membrane
there, so that if the figures can stack up and it does work, and there's a bit more, let's say, research done on it, then we would be definitely game to do. We're quite open. Dad, I would say, is very good at that sort of thing. And if we could start capturing methane, it'd be huge, wouldn't it?
It's being self-sufficient where you can. Obviously, there's some things are never going to make red diesel, but that's something that you could whittle out and you could run your tractor on a methane. It's all these things that in time, 5 years down the line, that you could be in control of.
So really interesting stuff there. Chris Walkland, coming back to you, we've heard a little bit about what the courtiers are doing. What structural or strategic things do farmers need to be thinking out about? Perhaps like this, perhaps around production systems, debt management. You mentioned contract choices in the main episode. What can farmers do to help them better navigate volatility?
Well, I don't think I could answer the question any better than what the courtiers have just done, because that's what they can do for their own situation on their own farms. I don't think they can do anything as far as the volatility in the market is concerned. Reducing that will only come if buyers and sellers, and buyers, I mean end-use buyers, not buyers from farms, if they can have longer-term deals in place with cap and collars, so the price doesn't go above a certain level and drop below a certain level. But we're not there yet. The trading environment doesn't work like that. Will it come? I'm not sure. Some processors have tried ironing out volatility through the futures, using the futures market and offering their farmers that option. That has failed miserably. In Southern Ireland, the processors have given their farmers the opportunity to fix their milk price at a certain level for a certain period of time, say 6, 9 or 12 months. They have been a disaster.
Really?
Yeah, they've been a complete disaster because A, they set the price too low, and B, and this will come as a complete shock, farmers are a skeptical bunch. And they think if they're offered a price of 40p, they'll think, that's going to be 42p, 43p. So they don't fix. And then lo and behold, it'll drop to 38p. So they haven't worked. Whether they'll come back or not, I don't know. I think what we haven't tried is, we sort of have tried fixed prices, but then the market changed significantly and then they were thrown out. What I was going to say is we haven't really tried sort of fixed prices with caps and collars, whether those will come in.
Okay.
So so basically by that I mean for the next 6 months you would get a price plus or minus 1 or 2p rather than 3p or so. But I can't see them coming in at the moment. So it's back to what the farmers can do for themselves.
Yeah, so control the controllable. That seems to be what we're hearing pretty loud and clear from you, Chris. And so thinking about closing this conversation, George, Christopher, I'm really interested if you were to speak to your peers and perhaps there's someone listening today who feels a bit helpless and they just don't know where they would go in their business, on their farm to look to try and mitigate the risks of having to pay for inputs which have volatile prices like you're doing. Where can they go? How can they find these pieces? Is it about talking to their peers, going to a discussion group? Is it about sort of just looking at the highest costs on their profit and loss statement? What should people listening today do to really try and look at making sure they are insulated against this volatility?
I would say for us, we joined a grazing group 8 years ago, and that has probably been one of the best things that we've done. Like-minded people doing the same sort of system, and you challenge each other. Back there in COVID, we created a WhatsApp group, and it just went on, who's doing this? Who can get that? How much are you paying for this? Where I'm not saying it's right, but I would say the intensive indoor people don't necessarily do that quite as much. And I feel like they should maybe, have their own discussion groups. It's all relatable. But I think if you are a grazing type person, for us, it was probably one of the best things that we done. Get you out the farm, clears your head, talk about what needs talking about.
Being honest with each other. That's the reality. Farm, it's just being honest with each other about what's going on and what, who's doing what. Because some guys will keep their cards maybe too close to the chest. I get that, but you need to ask that about. But I get, other things like AHDBs, those kind of things are very good, really. And, obviously, like yourselves, it's not been around very, but listen to like these kind of podcasts and that, every little thing that you could pick up, it's always worth listening to. It might be the smallest little thing, but to someone else, it could be quite a big thing. Yeah, social media too. This is where, in some ways, some kind of social media would be very good.
You just need to be a bit judicious. So, thank you very much for the plug for Farming Focus and other podcasts, which Chris Walkland may or may not be a part of. But Chris, that same question to you: what or where can farmers go to make sure that they are feeling empowered to do something about this volatility?
I would echo that about the grass discussion group. I just think bring an extra pair of eyes on the farm, whether that's a colleague, fellow farmer, consultant, for half a day or whatever. I remember being told a story about a guy that had an open day on his farm, and he said, "Oh, flipping out! I've been struggling with the bloody cow flow for 10 years ever since I put the parlour in." And somebody piped up and said, "Well, why don't you turn it round then?" He'd never thought about it. He turned his parlour round, and his problem went immediately. And that was just 5 or 6 words that a different person on that farm said to him, and it solved a problem that had been in play for 10 years.
A decade. That perspective, a second pair of eyes, a different way of looking at things can be so valuable. Gentlemen, thank you so much for the conversation today and last week. We really appreciate all of your thoughts and your time. So Chris Walkland, Christopher Courtier, George Courtier, thanks again. And it's been a pleasure having you on Farming Focus.
Cornish Mutual, farming insurance experts.